to experiment, to play with AI, to pilot is one thing. But when we start to talk about, okay, let's now take this to production, let's operationalize it, let's adopt it in our existing, workflows, that is a very different thing.
Hello and welcome to the AI Master Group podcast, featuring the people who are building the future of AI in their work today. I'm your host, Jim Griffin. Today I'm very excited to welcome Celia Wanderley, who is an expert on large-scale technology transformation. Currently, she's the Chief Innovation Officer at Bitglass, which is a top IT consulting firm. And before that, she was the Chief Technology Officer at AltaML. And before that, she was an architecture practice head at Deloitte Canada. Last year, Celia was recognized as the AI Innovator of the Year by Women in AI. Welcome, Celia.
Thank you, Jim.
So you made a big career move recently. I knew you first when you were at AltaML. Can you tell me a little bit about that move?
Yeah, well, I would say that, the biggest move would have been when I immigrated from Brazil to Canada, right? So anything compared to that is would be a smaller scale, just because of having to adapt to new ways of working. But you're right. So very recently, I left the job as CTO at AltaML and joined, which is a Canadian AI applied AI scale up, and joined Bitglass. Also known, we commonly refer to Bitglass as BIG, just for short, and to become their first Chief Innovation Officer. And my primary mandate right now is to grow the data engineering and AI practice.
So that's kind of interesting, this idea of becoming the first of anything, the first person with such a title. And that is happening a lot right now in our space. So tell me a little bit about that. Did you have a role to play in helping to define, or even now, helping to define what that title is actually going to mean? And how does that work?
Yeah, so maybe I'll talk a little bit about who Bitglass is, and that's going to help. We define ourselves as a global boutique technology solutions consulting firm. Again, right now we're about let's say about 300 and so people across Canada, US, UK, and India. And the space that we're in is what I like to call as like intelligent automation space. So what does that mean? That means that we help clients, generally, enterprise level clients with very complex heterogeneous environments, all the way from, business process automation, integration with those complex, heterogeneous systems, and now data engineering and AI, because AI has essentially become an essential part of all of those technologies that we implemented and all of the business processes that our clients want to automate. So the idea at Bitglass to bring in like a chief innovation officer was in some ways to understand how do emerging technologies, and right now, of course, top of mind would be AI, but who knows, right? What's going to be the next big thing? How do those emerging technologies fit into what our clients really need to be successful? I think the other thing that I like to say is that our job, what we do on a daily basis, is really to make digital transformation real. So you have a lot of like when there are conversations and engagements around digital transformation, it's very common for you to see large slide decks, a lot of conversation, a lot of strategy discussion, but sometimes clients may be left with a bit of a gap, right? So, okay, from how do I go from nice ideas conversation to actually using technology to implement, to digitize those processes? And how do I re-envision some of those processes and make use of these emerging technologies like generative AI, for example.
Yeah, I've seen that too. I wonder if you could tell me what some of the pitfalls or success factors that you've seen most often in projects you've done recently.
Yeah, I like to say that in terms of critical success factors, right? There's many things that one could list, but I would put two as top of mind. First one being data foundations, and the second one being business support, business champions. So on the data foundation side, it is I'd say to experiment, to play with AI, to pilot is one thing. But when you start to talk about, okay, let's now take this to production, let's operationalize it, let's adopt it in our existing, workflows, that is a very different thing. So I think, in our conversation before, I had mentioned that just last week I was, at a very large data and AI conference, and a CEO had put a number that was quite staggering. And it said that 85% of organizations still do not feel comfortable moving AI solutions to production, right? So that's very large number compared. There's a lot of investment being made. So for companies to not feel good about moving to production is something very serious and very interesting for us to dig into. And I would say that part of that is very much the requirements for very strong data engineering and data foundations, because as you start to operationalize those pipelines coming again from those complex data sources, heterogeneous data sources, business critical, data sources, you really like, organizations need a lot of confidence that it's going to work effectively, that it's going to be scalable, that it's going to be sustainable, that it's going to be, that are able to reproduce it, every time with similar outcomes, right? So that's, I think, one very important topic, success factor. The other one is really business support. Most people who worked with me would have seen me say that before, that the question I like to ask is, especially when you're in prioritization of different use cases, is do you have, a very committed, enthusiastic, a business champion, right? Because I have seen in the past use cases that maybe had a lower return on investment be more successful than others that would have a higher return on investment, because the champions, like the business support, was there. And it is in anytime you're adopting innovation, you need champions who are a little bit more comfortable with what the journey of innovation looks like, which is a more iterative journey, right? So you need to be accepting that you're going to be learning and it's going to get better, and that that you're willing to adapt and you're willing to change based on those learnings. And of course, a lot of the challenge on the other side of the spectrum, a lot of challenge would come when you don't have those things in place.
A little side question underneath that is about the same topic, starting off with a POC and then journeying through a pilot, MVP, and then taking something all the way to production. One of the things that I've noticed people lack clarity about as they lack clarity about as they start the POC stage is what this thing is going to cost in the end when it goes into full production. Even something as basic as what the API calls are going to be, or how much technology is going to need to be available. That's really something that all the stakeholders really are thirsty to know. And you might not know exactly the answer to that, but you might have some guardrails or boundaries around that just based on common sense.
That's a great question. Yeah, it's like I had that conversation just yesterday, so it's like, very very top of mind. And it of course makes a lot of sense that you use that sequence of steps, doing like an experiment, like a POC. I'm very much behind it. I believe it's the right way to do it, so that you don't go of course, all the way in without having proven, some of those steps. But you have to almost have that conversation up front, and in some cases talk about the different possible architectures, right? So that could be for a POC. It may make more sense that you use some of the just the APIs that are already available. Don't do too much tweaking, into how you're going to use that, because you can contain costs at the POC stage, but you have to have the conversation with clients up front that as you transition this to production, it may be it may be a good idea for us to talk about different architectures that would allow for a different cost structure, right? Because otherwise it could be prohibitive for you to implement it. The return on the return based on the investment that would be required, if you just do maybe the simplest way, may not be the way that you want to take it to production. I find that having that conversation very early on is very helpful, because you don't want to maybe surprise the client later on, and it's not expected that they would know, right? It's the expectation that generally the marketing doesn't get that doesn't get into that too much. It's like it is supposed to be simple, and it is a fantastic thing that we have access to to those types of tools in order to quickly innovate and to quickly experiment with things. But in some cases, that will be the way you take it to production. In other cases, you have to test some different architectures, do some different strategies, which may very well involve using like maybe a smaller model, right, and fine tuning that model, or it may involve uh, getting like a different model and then hosting it. So there's different I think different solutions for different business problems, but cost structures is absolutely something that we like to have a conversation about very early.
Can well imagine. Another thing that I know we've talked about before, and there's a lot of talk now about this, and that is the potential for agents, especially agents with full integration into workflow. Have you seen any projects recently that fit into that category?
Yeah, very, very much so. I think, personally, that's an area that I'm quite excited about. But also, I, in some ways, it ties so well with what Bits and Glass has done for the last, 20 years, which is this idea of the workflow automation. So what, when you look at, the idea that you can, in a single shot, right, be able to give a command and like a lot of reason, expect that all the reasoning will happen there, and then that's going to be the end of it, is like is maybe almost like a bit naive with what we have available today, even in spite of all the all of the progress we have made. But when you start to break that apart and be able to look at that as a sequence of actions, and start to put more of that, even like the ability to have that human interaction in between, and guide that, but have like move your AI from that, just being that what's called like the static respondent, to being more of a dynamic participant together with that human in the loop. Then you start to get into very sophisticated capabilities that you can add, to your solutions. So we've started, it's almost like we have started to uh, pretty much look into that pattern every time in the solutions that we have been building with clients. So some recent examples, things that we're doing, like a solution, we have a solution in the reinsurance, underwriting workbench, and that of course involves a lot of complex documents, but also the decisioning, and being able to have multiple AI skills applied, but have a little bit of that, that input in between when it's in the end, when it's packaged to the end user, they don't necessarily see, all that's happening like behind the curtain.
You're listening to the AI Master Group podcast.
In the end, when it's packaged to the end user, they don't necessarily see, all that's happening like behind the curtain. But that's the pattern that we would have approached to, like, even like in contract analysis or document analysis as part of of claim processing. The other one is we have a solution in the regulatory change management, for banking, and you can think about that one as there's almost a bit of horizon scanning, being able to needing to go get changes in regulatory processes, like scrape some of those in different external sources, be able to match that with the specific guidelines or licenses that a particular organization may have, and understand determine what impact might be. And it's a sequence of actions that in the end all get orchestrated inside this easy to use front end interface that the enterprise low code platforms tend to offer, but with some of that complexity being almost organized inside an agent or multiple agents. So I think we're quite excited about what we're going to be able to build with that pattern.
I like that. This concept of a sequence of actions is very intuitive for somebody that's interacting with a solution. It's like, okay, here's the next step. Tell me more. No, I disagree with that. Tell me more. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. One of the things I'm interested in knowing, if you've seen any trends in the work you've been doing that maybe surprised you a little bit.
I think so. Yeah, it's the and it's not necessarily a trend that I would have, because there's the trends that we read, right? In the things that we read every day. But I would say that the trend that I've seen is what is resonating with clients, what clients are asking for, what's getting them excited. And I would say that it is the transformation, the ability to transform user experience. We in the last a few months here, we have done a number of working on a number of different solutions that are related to voice activation of workflows, right? That seems to get clients really enthusiastic about, gets them thinking about, whoa, what this could do for how our people work. Maybe if I take you through a bit of a storyline there, people who really are on the field, right? Doing things like, let's say, things that look like an inspection. And if you think about how that all started, it's people would take paper to their field location and they would write. Then, later on, we implemented digital solutions for them. So they would, still take the paper, come back to the office, type it, right? Then they said, no, we're going to make your life better. We're going to give you like a mobile interface, and then force them to either take a tablet, and in some cases this rugged tablet, and it's just very not necessarily a very desirable piece of a gadget, and or they would take their phone and type in this tiny screen. So it's almost like you were always forcing the user experience on the user versus asking them, okay, how in a perfect world scenario, how would you see this happening? And when we ask that question, the answer is, well, I would just want to, if I'm doing an inspection here, I'm just, I want to just say out loud what it is that I'm finding, and I want the application that you've built for me, this business process automation, or even this workflow, to just magically know what it's supposed to do, what I'm saying and what it's supposed to do. I don't think that was very easy to do, even 2 years ago, and not say that it is just completely out of the box now, but we have been able to, in more than one scenario, more than one, business type of setting, like a business domain, be able to do that intake of voice in more than one language, because many of these clients operate in multiple areas of the globe, and extract only the interesting pieces of that of that conversation that automated workflow cares about, then populate those into that into the workflow solution, and prompt it back to the client, so that the client only has to say yes or no, and then it's and it's going to go forward. So that is, I mean, you know, that type of voice activated assistant that can, that again, back to the pattern of the agent, right? That there's still a communication. It's not in a full, like, all in one shot, but we have been quite successful. And when you fine tune those models to a very specific a business domain, very specific set of actions, they tend to work quite well. Be a lot more, I would say, reliable, and not, going back to the fear of hallucination, and just we are able to put a lot more guardrails when it's a well-defined pattern that they're working with, and users, I think, see that as a less threatening way to adopt new solutions.
Certainly. Voice activated projects. Another question that comes up a lot is all the major vendors have got some kind of AI. What part of all this conversation is basically commodity? And where do I, as a business leader, lean in on the areas where I think I should really actually be investing versus just buying off the shelf?
That's a fantastic question, and one that we have often, right? So it is no secret and to be expected that I think every large solution out there will have AI, and especially generative AI embedded. All the ERPs, the CRMs, all the business productivity suites. Like if you use Microsoft or Google or whatever you use, like you will see some of those capabilities there. So, and in what we do, the business process automation, platforms, of course, are all adding those capabilities and exposing them as different AI skills. So what we like to recommend is that if your ERP has that capability there, and the ability to, let's say, to chat with the records that are already there, to do summarization, like a lot of this, almost like the commoditized capabilities that generative AI became made popular. Like, there's no reason why you just go and implement that outside of it. You should, when you can leverage it right there. uh, but then there will be some other, maybe more complex, more strategic use cases where you will want data to come from multiple of those systems. The data may be complex in multiple formats, maybe streaming data, or more documents, and like images, like videos, and the ability, that for a particular, almost this idea of this data products, right? That for a combination of data sets, you are able to build multiple solutions on top to solve very differentiating business cases. So I think that's very much, we envision that we're going to be operating in both areas. We are enabling our, so let's say, the platforms that we operate, the software engineers that are comfortable implementing solutions in those platforms. We have been upskilling them and saying, okay, just build, add the AI skills right there. But also, let's be aware that there will be limitations. There will be some of these more strategic, types of use cases. We're going to maybe take that away and have more in-depth ML engineering, data engineering, capabilities to be able to create differentiation for companies and for our clients.
I can picture that. Yeah. You told us a little bit about, I call it bits and glass, and you just say big because that's easier, you know. But by whatever name, one of the questions that I hear leaders asking in one form or another is, do I need a third party? Or should I really just try to double down and do my AI projects in house? Maybe it's something strategic. Maybe I need to just figure that out on my own. Maybe there's a mix. What do you think is the right answer for those kinds of questions?
Yeah, I feel quite strongly about that answer, and it's not just based on theory. It is based on what I have seen, right? So in the last few years, working with clients, I believe the answer is both. AI is a very strategic capability and becoming more strategic every day. So it is going to become part of every business, and in every business area within an organization. So you really need to be thinking about building up, that strategic capability in house. However, you need to think about, you can't you have to right size it, because the investment can be quite high. The competition for talent, like the ability to retain talent, is still not a problem that that's fully solved, right? Because the best talent still quite, there's a lot of competition for the highly qualified resources. So most companies that I see, even like sometimes like very, I get surprised because like just very large logos that you would imagine are just very mature. There's still, it could be that the capability is still nascent, that they have done a lot of experimentation but haven't necessarily operationalized or adopt many of those of the solutions that they have thought about creating. So when you work with a partner, you have the ability to almost reuse the learning from the mistakes that that partner would have done or that they would have seen others do, and in some ways help you leapfrog your journey a little bit, and avoid rework, and at the end of the day minimize the overall investment that you need to make to stand up capability, and bring some of that the freshness of of new patterns, new solutions in this space. Of course, I think one thing that is quite unique is that the it's not uncommon for a pattern that works in one industry to be quite applicable to another very different industry. So just learning from those from those experiences will allow you to have fresh perspectives, fresh ideas on what to do. So getting a partner, helping that partner really stand up your processes, help you architect your data foundations, understand how you're going to be building those reliable, scalable pipelines, the right, making the right, navigating overwhelm too, because it's like every vendor will be coming to you and say, buy my AI, buy my AI, or use my AI, use my AI. And that can be overwhelming to say, well, which decisions should I make as far as architecture is concerned. And then building that relationship, you also going to be prepared to help with spikes of demand, because it's you have partners that will work strongly in your environment, and not having to have experts in every single area in your team. Like, again, going back to that right sizing the investment, this is an area where you have, so let's say different types of specializations like computer vision, time series, like even like in the natural language processing, generative AI, you're seeing like different things come up as far what people specialize in. Not to mention some of the commercial, platforms and the hyperscalers and the uniqueness of each one of those. So maintaining an internal team that knows it all is maybe harder, and a partner, because that's going to be serving multiple clients, you may be able to leverage those economies of scale, and and be able to have the right time, at the right time for an overall, cost that is lower. But I think having that minimal internal capability is quite essential.
Yeah, blending it together. Overall cost that's lower. One last question. If someone's interested in contacting you, how should they do that?
I love connecting with people, as you know, Jim. So best platform would be LinkedIn. I tend to be quite responsive, to those who connect with me there. So you have my name available there. It should be easy to find.
All right. I'll be looking forward to hearing more of your projects and the new trends that you identify in the months and years to come. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for the conversation, Jim.
You've been listening to the AI Master Group Podcast. I'm your host, Jim Griffin. Until next time, stay curious and stay in front.